All right, buckle up, everybody, because we're diving deep into a story with some serious global implications this week.
Oh, this one's a doozy.
It really is. We're talking about the recent earthquake in Iran
Mm.
and the online frenzy wondering if it was even an earthquake at all.
Yeah, the internet sleuths have been busy with this one.
Let's just say there are some pretty interesting theories floating around out there.
Some more believable than others, I'm sure.
Exactly. And that's why we're here to try to separate fact from, well, let's just call it speculation.
Sounds like a plan.
So to set the stage, we're looking at this Euronews article titled Iran, an earthquake or a secret underground nuclear test.
Gets right to the point, doesn't it?
It sure does. No time wasted. Okay, so rewind to October 6th, 2024. Seemingly normal day, right?
Yeah, just another day on the calendar.
Until a 4.4 magnitude earthquake hits near Aradan in Iran's Semnan province.
And that's where things get a little less ordinary.
Because a 4.4 magnitude earthquake on its own, it's not exactly breaking news.
Right, those happen. Earthquakes are a fact of life in many parts of the world, and Iran is definitely one of them.
So why all the fuss? What makes this particular earthquake so noteworthy?
Well, it's not just about the earthquake itself, it's about what those numbers tell us when we dig a little deeper. A 4.4 magnitude at a depth of 12 kilometers, that's relatively minor, but it's the depth that's got everyone's attention, especially when you start thinking about the possibility of it being, let's say, a less than natural event.
So the depth of the earthquake is a clue. I'm intrigued. Explain that.
You see, underground nuclear tests, they're typically done at depths much shallower than your average earthquake. And there's a reason for that. They need to contain the blast, for analysis and to minimize any radioactive fallout. So when you have an earthquake, even a relatively small one like this, happening at a depth of 12 kilometers, it makes it less likely to be caused by a nuclear detonation.
Okay, so the earthquake itself might not be the smoking gun some people think it is, but we'd be remiss not to mention that this all went down against a backdrop of some pretty tense international relations and a whole lot of scrutiny on Iran's nuclear ambitions. What's the significance of that timing, in terms of how this event was perceived?
Oh, it's absolutely crucial. This wasn't just any earthquake. It happened at a time when you've got Iranian officials saying things, hinting about maybe changing their stance on nuclear weapons.
Because of the sanctions and the international pressure?
Exactly. If they're feeling the squeeze, they're saying, well, maybe we need to rethink our position on things. So naturally, when you have an earthquake near a site that some suspect might have something to do with nuclear activity, well, people are going to put two and two together.
And the rumor mill starts churning.
Oh, yeah. And social media. Well, let's just say it had a field day with this one.
Right, because a mystery wrapped in a potential international incident, that's Twitter's bread and butter.
You said it. And this is where understanding the nuances, really digging into the context, becomes so important. It's not always as simple as it looks on the surface.
There's always more to the story.
Always. And in this case, it's important to note that Noor News, and they've got ties to Iran's National Security Council, came out pretty quickly and denied these rumors.
Yeah, they were adamant this was just an earthquake, nothing more. Case closed.
Right, trying to shut down that speculation before it really took hold. And this is where it gets interesting denials, especially in these high-stakes situations. They don't always tell the whole story.
Meaning, just because they denied it doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Exactly. Think of it as strategic ambiguity. Sometimes a country might issue a denial, but it's carefully worded, vague enough to leave some wiggle room.
To keep everyone guessing.
Right. To muddy the waters a bit, make it harder for others to take a definitive stance.
So it's like a game of chess, always thinking several moves ahead. Speaking of digging deeper, there's this report from back in 2019, The Field Project, that adds another layer to this whole thing. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so the Field Project was a report put out by the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, the FDD, and they claim to have found a site southeast of Semnan that could be used for underground nuclear testing.
How did they come to that conclusion?
Well, they used a whole bunch of sources, like satellite photos, testimonies from people who had left Iran, and anything else they could find publicly.
So they've got eyes in the sky, people on the ground, and then they're piecing it all together with whatever information is out there.
Basically. And what they found, or at least what they claimed to have found, was pretty compelling.
In what way?
Well, they pointed to specific things they were seeing at this site, things you'd expect to see if someone was trying to hide a nuclear testing facility.
Yeah.
Things like tunnels, ventilation shafts, specialized equipment, that sort of thing.
Okay. Starting to get a clearer picture here. We've got a potential secret nuclear site, an earthquake nearby, and a whole lot of official denials. It's like we walked onto the set of a spy movie or something.
Right. It's got all the elements. But before we jump to any conclusions, there is one piece of this puzzle that doesn't quite fit, and that's the location of the earthquake itself.
Right. The earthquake's epicenter and this field project site you mentioned, they're over 100 kilometers apart. That's not exactly next door. So how does that impact the whole, was this a nuclear test theory?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It definitely throws a wrench in things.
Because if this really was a nuclear test connected to that field project site, wouldn't we expect the earthquake to be a lot closer?
You would think so.
Yeah.
So this is where we start exploring the different possibilities.
All right, lay them on us. What are we looking at here?
Well, possibility number one, and probably the simplest explanation, is just dumb luck. Earthquakes happen in that region pretty frequently, and this one just happened to be near a site that has attracted some, let's call it, extra attention lately.
A coincidence. So we're saying it's possible that this was just an act of nature, poorly timed, maybe a little suspicious, but ultimately not something orchestrated.
It's a possibility, right? Not everything is a conspiracy.
Okay, so that's one option. What's the other side of that coin? What if this wasn't just Mother Nature doing her thing?
Well, then it starts to get really interesting. Because, and I think this is something a lot of people might not realize, Iran already has a known nuclear facility at Natanz.
Right, that's not exactly a secret.
Exactly. So if they were going to conduct a test there at a known site, everyone would know it wouldn't be very effective.
They wouldn't be able to hide it. So are you suggesting there could be another facility? One that's completely off the grid, closer to where this earthquake happened?
It might sound crazy, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. I mean, we're talking about a country that has a vested interest in keeping its nuclear activities under wraps. If you were going to do something you didn't want the world to know about, you wouldn't do it in your backyard, right? You'd find somewhere a little more discreet.
A secret facility, hidden even deeper than the one that was potentially outed in the field project.
Wow. Okay, so we've gone from maybe one secret facility to maybe two, from a simple earthquake to a potential clandestine operation. It's getting harder to separate fact from fiction here.
That's the thing about these situations. It's not always clear-cut. You've got a lot of information swirling around. Some of it's accurate, some of it's not. It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but you're missing half the pieces.
And probably looking at the wrong box top. It makes you realize how important it is to be really careful about the information you consume, especially these days. Social media makes it so easy for rumors and speculation to spread like wildfire. Oh, absolutely. And with something like this, where the stakes are so high, it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a potential international incident. But we have to take a step back, look at the evidence, and acknowledge that there are still a lot of unknowns.
We don't have all the answers.
We might never have all the answers, and that's okay. The important thing is to be honest about what we do and don't know.
To acknowledge the uncertainties.
Yes. We can't definitively say there wasn't a nuclear test, but we also can't definitively say there was one. All we can do is look at the information we have, consider the different perspectives, and try to form our own, hopefully informed, conclusions.
So for our listeners who are probably feeling a little overwhelmed right now, what's the most important thing to remember when navigating these kinds of complex and often confusing situations?
I think the key takeaway here is the importance of being, how should I say this, an active participant in your own information consumption. Don't just passively accept what you read or hear.
Don't believe everything you read on the internet.
Especially on the internet. Be critical, ask questions, and don't be afraid to seek out different viewpoints. Look for evidence-based reporting. Be wary of anything that seems overly sensationalized, and always remember that, more often than not, the most accurate answer is, it's complicated.
It's rarely a simple yes or no answer. It's that gray area, the space between what we know for sure and what we're still trying to figure out, that makes these deep dives so fascinating.
I completely agree. And in the case of this Iranian earthquake, there are still many unanswered questions. Was it a natural occurrence, a deliberate act, or maybe a bit of both? We may never know for sure.
And that's the mystery, isn't it?
It is. But I think the process of trying to unravel that mystery, of examining the evidence and having these conversations, is just as important as finding a definitive answer.
It's like they say, always consider the source.
Oh, 100%. Everyone's got an angle, right?
Right.
And sometimes those angles, they can really warp the information we're getting, especially when you're talking about geopolitics, global power dynamics.
It's easy to get caught up in the headlines, right? especially when you're talking about things like nuclear weapons, potential threats. But like you said, taking that step back, trying to see the bigger picture, that's crucial. So for our listeners, if they're feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this, what's the best way to sort through all of it? I mean, how can we be better at navigating this information landscape?
You hit the nail on the head. It's really about being an active participant in how you consume information. Don't just passively take in whatever you see or hear. Be critical, question what you're reading, what you're being told, and don't be afraid to look for those different perspectives. I can't emphasize that enough.
So it's not just about finding information, it's about evaluating it.
Exactly. Look for sources that rely on evidence, facts, not just speculation. Be wary of anything that feels like they're trying to sensationalize things, And I think the most important thing to remember is that a lot of times the most accurate answer is, it's complicated.
It's rarely a simple yes or no. It's that gray area, the space between what we know for sure and what we're still trying to figure out, that makes these deep dives so fascinating. And in the case of this earthquake in Iran, well, there are still a lot of unanswered questions.
Absolutely. Was it natural? Was it deliberate?
No.
Or could it be a little bit of both? It's a real head scratcher.
We may never know the full story.
We may not. But I think what we've done today, by looking at the evidence, by having this conversation, that's what matters.
Engaging with the complexities.
Exactly. Because the world is a complex place. And if we want to make sense of it, we have to be willing to engage with those complexities.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So to wrap things up, it seems like we're left with more questions than answers this week. But as we always say, that's part of the fun. The mystery surrounding Iran's nuclear ambitions is far from over, and this earthquake, natural or otherwise, is just one small piece of a much larger puzzle. So until next time, keep asking those tough questions, and never stop exploring the world with a healthy dose of curiosity and a good amount of skepticism too.